She never thought she'd be a widow at 43. Her husband Tom's sudden heart attack turned her world upside down. One minute they were planning their summer vacation, and the next she was planning his funeral. The service was beautiful, if a funeral could ever be called that. Friends from Tom's law firm spoke about his dedication and sharp mind. Neighbors recalled his friendly waves and help with yard work. Family members shared stories that made people laugh through their tears. But for her, it all passed in a blur. She nodded when people squeezed her hand, hugged back when arms wrapped around her, and thanked everyone for coming without really hearing her own words. When the last car finally drove away from their house, she stood in the doorway looking at their home. The same walls, same furniture, same pictures hanging in the hallway, but everything felt hollow now. Tom's booming laugh would never echo through these rooms again. The smell of his morning coffee wouldn't wake her up anymore. One day at a time, her sister had told her before leaving. Just focus on one small task each day. So that's what she tried to do. The first week, she sorted through his clothes, running her fingers over his favorite sweater before putting it in the donation box. The second week, she canceled his subscriptions and called about his life insurance. But there was one task she kept avoiding: his office at the back of the house. Tom had converted an old sunroom into his private workspace years ago. While she had free access to every other part of their home, this room stayed locked when he wasn't using it. Just boring legal stuff and client files, he'd always say with a little wave of his hand whenever she asked about it. Nothing but paperwork that would put you to sleep. She never pushed the issue. After all, he was a corporate attorney with important clients. Confidentiality was part of his job, and she respected his work boundaries. During their 12 years of marriage, she probably only stepped fully into that room a handful of times, usually just to bring him tea or remind him about dinner. 3 weeks after the funeral, she woke up feeling different, not better. The ache in her chest hadn't gone away, but stronger somehow. Today would be the day she'd face Tom's office. The key was on his keychain, returned by the hospital in a plastic bag along with his wallet, wedding ring, and the watch she'd given him for their 10th anniversary. Her hand shook slightly as she fitted into the lock and turned. The door swung open to reveal a perfectly organized room. Tom had always been tidy, but his office took this to another level. The desk stood against one wall, its surface clear except for a lamp, computer, and a row of color-coded legal pads. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with law books and binders. Everything had its place. She stepped inside, running her fingers along the edge of his desk. This was where he spent so many late nights, working on cases. This was where he'd take private phone calls that ended abruptly when she walked near. This room held a piece of Tom she hadn't been allowed to know. Her eyes drifted to the corner where a heavy filing cabinet stood. Unlike the simple metal ones in most offices, this was an expensive model with polished wood panels and, she noticed with a frown, an additional lock beyond the standard drawer locks. "What did you need to keep so private, Tom?" she whispered to the empty room. She tried each small key on his keychain, but none fit this second lock. Searching through his desk drawers revealed nothing but normal office supplies, neatly arranged. The computer asked for a password she didn't know. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye, a slight gap in the wooden paneling behind the filing cabinet. It was barely noticeable, but once seen, impossible to ignore. She pushed against the heavy cabinet, using all her strength to move it a few inches. There, hidden in the wall, was another keyhole. Her heart beat faster as she stared at this secret door. Whatever Tom had been hiding, it was behind something he'd taken great pains to conceal. She suddenly realized she might not have known her husband at all. She couldn't sleep that night. The hidden keyhole in Tom's office wall kept her tossing and turning. What could be so important that he needed to hide it behind a false wall? By morning, she was exhausted but determined to find answers. After breakfast, she dumped Tom's key collection on the kitchen table. He'd always collected keys, old ones from antique shops, decorative ones that didn't open anything, spare keys to friends' homes. She teased him about it, calling it his treasure chest collection. Now she wondered if there had been another reason for keeping so many. One by one, she tried each key in the hidden keyhole. None worked. Frustrated, she sat in Tom's office chair, spinning slowly as she thought. Her eyes landed on the bookshelf. Tom organized everything with purpose. Maybe the key was hidden among his books. For hours, she pulled books from shelves, flipping through pages, checking behind rows. Nothing. She was about to give up when she noticed something odd about a heavy law dictionary. Unlike the other books, its pages seemed stuck together. Carefully, she pried at the center and gasped. The middle had been hollowed out, creating a secret compartment. Inside was a small silver key. Her hands trembled as she knelt before the hidden keyhole. The key slid in perfectly. With a soft click, a section of the wall panel swung open, revealing a small safe. "Tom," she whispered, "what were you hiding from me?" The safe had a combination lock. She tried their anniversary date, then his birthday. Nothing worked. She sat back on her heels, thinking, what numbers would Tom use? Then it hit her, the date they first met. 3 numbers that had changed both their lives. The safe opened with a quiet hiss. Inside was a stack of folders, red, blue, and black, each labeled with only a date. She pulled out the first folder, a red one, and opened it on Tom's desk. Inside were photos of a woman she didn't recognize. Young, maybe early 30s, with light hair. The photos looked like they'd been taken without the woman knowing, walking to her car, entering a building, sitting in a coffee shop window. Paper clipped to the photos were handwritten notes detailing the woman's daily schedule and home address. Her stomach knotted as she opened another folder, this one blue. Same type of contents, different woman. Then a black folder, yet another woman, but these photos showed an empty apartment, as if someone had searched through it. The final page in each folder contained the same chilling words in Tom's neat handwriting, "Case resolved." She grabbed another set of folders, her breathing coming faster. More women, more surveillance photos, more detailed notes about their routines. The folders went back years, some from before she'd even met Tom. In the very back of the safe was a leather-bound journal. Tom's journal, filled with entries in his distinctive handwriting. She flipped it open to a random page and read, "Subject shows no awareness of surveillance. Lives alone, no pets. Works late Tuesdays and Thursdays. Alarm system basic. Best access point remains rear bathroom window." She slammed the journal shut, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. This wasn't legal work. These weren't client files. This was something else entirely, something dark and frightening. A sudden noise made her jump, just the neighbor's dog barking. But it broke her trance. She looked at the mess of folders spread across Tom's pristine desk. The perfect husband she buried 3 weeks ago was a stranger. The man who'd kissed her goodbye every morning had been living a secret life right under her nose. She gathered everything from the safe and carried it to their bedroom. Pushing aside shoeboxes, she hid the folders deep in her closet. She needed time to process what she found, to figure out what it all meant. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, the faces of those unknown women floating in her mind. Who were they? What had Tom done to them? And most terrifying of all, would whoever Tom had been working with come looking for these files? For the first time since the funeral, she got up and checked that all the doors and windows were locked. The house that had felt so empty now felt washed. Morning came after a restless night. She made coffee on autopilot, her mind racing through possibilities. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe Tom had been doing private investigation work on the side. Maybe these women were part of cases he couldn't talk about. But deep down, she knew these excuses rang hollow. Private investigators don't hide their work behind false walls and secret safes. They don't keep journals with entry points to women's homes. She spread the folders across the kitchen table, organizing them by date. The earliest was from 15 years ago, 5 years before she'd even met Tom. The most recent was dated just 3 weeks before his heart attack. "What were you doing, Tom?" she whispered, touching the latest folder. "Who were you?" She decided to start with the most recent case. The woman in the photos looked to be in her 30s, with dark hair cut in a short bob. Unlike the other files, this one contained newspaper clippings, a small article about a local art teacher winning a community award. According to Tom's notes, the woman lived alone in an apartment downtown, taught art classes 3 evenings a week, and spent Sundays at her mother's house. Fighting back nausea, she read Tom's final entry on this woman: "Subject's security system upgraded last week. New approach needed. Considering professional connection." What did that mean? Had Tom been planning to meet this woman? To what end? She reached for her phone, then stopped. Who could she call? The police? And tell them what? That her dead husband had been stalking women. That he'd been breaking into their homes. She had no proof he actually done anything beyond surveillance. And what would happen to her if this became public? The thought of reporters camped outside her door made her shudder. No, she needed to understand more before involving anyone else. She returned to the office and searched every inch. Behind the bookshelf, she found a hidden panel with a small electronic device inside, some kind of scanner or bug. In a locked drawer was an envelope containing $10,000 in cash and a prepaid phone. The phone's call history showed only one number, called repeatedly. Her hand hovered over the redial button. Whoever was on the other end of that line knew something about Tom's secret life. But what if they were dangerous? What if they came looking for her? She put the phone aside and turned to Tom's computer. Without his password, she couldn't access his files. But underneath the keyboard, taped to the desk, she found a small flash drive. Her laptop sat on the living room coffee table. She plugged in the drive, half expecting to find it password protected too, but files popped up immediately. Video files, dozens of them, each labeled with just a date. With trembling fingers, she clicked on one. The screen showed the inside of a woman's apartment, filmed from what looked like a hidden camera. A timestamp ran in the corner as the empty apartment sat there for minutes. Then a door opened and a woman entered, one of the women from the folders. She slammed the laptop shut, breathing hard. This was worse than she'd imagined. Tom hadn't just been watching these women from afar. He'd been inside their homes, planting cameras. The doorbell rang, making her jump. Through the peephole, she saw a man in a suit standing on her porch. He looked official, maybe a detective or lawyer. She froze, suddenly aware of the incriminating evidence spread throughout her house. If this man was police, if he had a search warrant. The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. She took a deep breath, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and opened the door just enough to see him properly. "Can I help you?" she asked, working to keep her voice steady. "Mrs. Wilson?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Detective Harmon. I worked with your husband on some cases. I was hoping we could talk." Her blood ran cold. What kind of cases had Tom been working on with this man? And what did he really want from her? She invited Detective Harmon in, her mind racing. The folders were still spread across the kitchen table. The flash drive sat plugged into her laptop. Evidence of Tom's secret life was everywhere. "Let's talk in the living room," she said, guiding him away from the kitchen. "Can I get you some coffee?" "No, thank you," he replied, his eyes scanning the room as he sat down. "Nice place." Tom always said he had a good eye for homes. She smiled stiffly. "How did you know my husband?" Detective Harmon leaned back, making himself comfortable. "We worked together on several cases over the years. Tom was very thorough in his investigations." "Investigations?" She kept her voice neutral. Tom was a corporate attorney. "That was his day job," Harmon said with a small smile. "But surely you knew about his other work? The private cases he took on?" She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Tom kept his work life quite private. Client confidentiality, he always said. Harmon studied her face. Very professional of him. That's why we worked well together. Neither of us talked too much. He leaned forward. "The thing is, Tom and I were in the middle of something when he passed. I was hoping he might have left some files for me." Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. What kind of files? Information on a case. Photographs, notes, maybe some video. His eyes drifted toward the hallway leading to Tom's office. "Would you mind if I took a look in his workspace? It shouldn't take long." Alarm bells rang in her head. If he saw the safe, the hidden keyhole, the disrupted office. "I haven't gone through his things yet," she lied. "It's been too difficult. Everything's still locked up." Harmon's smile faded slightly. "I understand completely. Grief takes time. But this is important business. Maybe I could help you look? 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. "I don't have the keys," she said, another lie. His law firm took them. Something about client confidentiality. Harmon's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. That's unusual protocol. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. She felt like a mouse being watched by a cat. Tom mentioned you were understanding about his work, Harmon finally said. That you never asked too many questions. He appreciated that quality in you. The comment sent a chill down her spine. Had Tom actually said that, or was Harmon fishing for information? We respected each other's privacy, she replied carefully. Harmon nodded slowly. Smart approach to marriage. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. When you're ready to go through his things, give me a call. I'm happy to help, day or night. She took the card, noticing there was no police department logo, just his name and a phone number. Are you with the city police? County Sheriff's Office, he said smoothly. Special Investigations Unit. After Harmon left, she watched from the window as he sat in his car, staring at the house. He made a phone call, speaking animatedly. 30 minutes passed before he finally drove away. She immediately gathered all the folders, the flash drive, and Tom's journal, stuffing everything into a duffel bag. Whatever her husband had been involved in, Detective Harmon was part of it, and she wasn't sure he was really a detective at all. That afternoon, she rented a small storage unit across town, paying cash and using her maiden name. She stored all the evidence there, keeping only photos of the women on her phone. She needed to know who they were, if they were safe, and what Tom had done to them. Back home, she searched online for Detective Harmon. The county sheriff's website listed their offices, but no Harmon appeared. She tried the city police too. Nothing. A broader search turned up a James Harmon who'd been dismissed from a police force 2 states away 5 years ago for evidence tampering. Her phone rang, making her jump. Unknown number. Hello, she answered cautiously. Mrs. Wilson. A woman's voice, unfamiliar. You don't know me, but I think I knew your husband. We need to talk. Who is this? She asked, her mouth suddenly dry. Someone who's been watching that house for a long time, the woman replied. And I'm not the only one. Be careful who you invite inside. Not everyone is who they claim to be. The line went dead. She couldn't sleep that night. The mysterious caller's warning echoed in her mind. People were watching her house. People connected to whatever Tom had been involved in. At dawn, she made a decision. She needed to meet this woman, but not at home where Harmon or others might be watching. She texted the number from last night. Coffee shop on Main Street. 10 a.m. The reply came quickly. Back table. Wear something blue. She arrived early, choosing a seat with a view of both the entrance and the back exit. At exactly 10 a.m., a woman in her 40s with auburn hair walked in. Their eyes met briefly, and the woman headed to her table. Thanks for meeting me, the woman said, sitting down. I wasn't sure you would come. You said you knew my husband. The woman nodded. Not in the way you think. My name is Diane. 5 years ago, I started noticing strange things happen in my apartment. Items moved, the feeling of being watched. Then I found a tiny camera hidden in my bathroom vent. Her stomach twisted. And you think Tom was involved? I know he was, Diane said flatly. I caught him outside my building one night. When I confronted him, he claimed to be working as a private investigator, checking on me for a concerned friend. She paused. I never believed him, but I couldn't prove anything else. Why are you telling me this now? Because after I saw your husband's obituary, strange things started happening again. Someone's been watching my apartment, and I'm not the only one. Diane lowered her voice. There were others before me, and I think there's more to this than just one man's obsession. Her hands trembled around her coffee cup. What do you mean? Your husband wasn't working alone. The man who came to your house yesterday, I've seen him before, watching your husband from a distance. Harmon isn't a real detective, is he? Diane shook her head. Whatever they were doing, it involved more than just watching women. 2 years ago, a woman named Judy disappeared. Before she vanished, she told me she'd caught someone placing cameras in her house. She reported it to the police, but nothing came of it. Did she mention Tom? Not by name. But she described a man who sounds like your husband. Diane hesitated. There's something else you should know. Tom was married before you. This stopped her cold. What? No, that's not possible. I would have known. Her name was Lisa. They were married for less than a year before she disappeared. The official story was that she left him, moved away. But nobody's heard from her since. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too public. How do you know all this? Because I've been looking into these disappearances for years. After what happened to me, I needed to understand. Diane pulled out a small notebook. There's a pattern. First, surveillance. Then, escalation, breaking in, planting cameras, and for some women, a final stage. She felt sick. Do you think my husband killed these women? I don't know. But I think he and his partner, your detective Harmon, know what happened to them. Diane slid the notebook across the table. This has everything I've gathered. Names, dates, patterns. The last page has an address you should visit, a property in the mountains registered to a company. I traced the company back to your husband. She took the notebook with numb fingers. Why are you giving me this? Because you're in danger too. Whatever they were doing, Harmon clearly thinks you know something. And now that Tom is gone, Diane left the implication hanging. What should I do? Go to the police? Which ones? Diane asked bitterly. How do you know Harmon doesn't have friends in the department? No, you need proof first. Solid evidence of what they've done. As they parted ways outside the coffee shop, Diane gripped her arm. Be careful. Check your house for cameras. Don't trust anyone who knew Tom. And whatever you do, don't let Harmon know you're investigating. That afternoon, she drove by the mountain address in Diane's notebook. From the road, she could see a small cabin set back among the trees. It looked abandoned, but a new padlock secured the gate at the end of the driveway. Someone was still maintaining this property, someone who didn't want visitors. She drove home, her mind racing with terrible possibilities. Her husband, the man she'd loved and mourned, might be connected to missing women. He might have been more than just a voyeur, he might have been a predator. And his partner was still out there, watching her. She spent the night debating what to do about the mountain cabin. Going alone seemed dangerous, but who could she trust? In the end, she decided she needed to see inside that cabin herself before involving anyone else. The next morning, she packed carefully. Flashlight, gloves, a phone with a full charge, and a small canister of pepper spray she'd bought years ago but never thought she'd need. She wore hiking boots and dark clothes, hoping to blend into the forest if someone came by. The drive took nearly 2 hours, winding roads leading deeper into the mountains. She parked her car half a mile from the property, hiding it behind a cluster of trees. The walk to the cabin was uphill, her heart pounding as much from fear as from exertion. The padlocked gate presented the first challenge. She studied it, then remembered something from Diane's notebook. Tom always kept spare keys in magnetic boxes. She ran her fingers along the metal gate post and found it, a small black box stuck to the inside of the post. Inside was a key that opened the padlock perfectly. The narrow dirt driveway led to a small cabin that looked ordinary enough from the outside. Weathered wood siding, a covered porch, windows with the blinds drawn. It could have been anyone's weekend getaway. She approached cautiously, checking for security cameras or motion sensors. Finding none, she crept onto the porch and tried the door. Locked, of course. She found another magnetic key box hidden under a flower pot. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly clean. No dust, no cobwebs. Someone had been maintaining it. The main room contained basic furniture. A couch, a table with chairs, a small kitchenette. Everything looked normal until she opened a cabinet and found it stocked with canned food, batteries, and first aid supplies, enough to last weeks. "What were you planning, Tom?" she whispered to the empty room. A hallway led to 2 doors. The first opened to a bedroom with a neatly made bed and empty dresser. The second door was different, heavier, with a deadbolt lock. This key wasn't hidden. It hung on a hook beside the door, almost as if whoever used this place wanted easy access. Her hand trembled as she unlocked the door. It opened to reveal a staircase leading down into darkness. She switched on her flashlight and descended slowly, one hand on the wall for support. The basement was larger than she expected, sectioned into different areas. One corner held electronics, computers, monitors, hard drives. Another had shelves stacked with labeled boxes. But what made her freeze was the center of the room. A chair bolted to the floor, restraints attached to the arms and legs. A camera on a tripod pointed directly at it. Her stomach lurched. This wasn't just a surveillance operation. This was something much worse. Fighting nausea, she forced herself to examine the rest of the basement. The boxes on the shelves contained personal items, women's jewelry, driver's licenses, phones. Each box was labeled with only initials and a date. The computer setup had multiple screens, all dark now. A desk drawer revealed a leather-bound journal, the same type Tom had kept in his secret safe at home. She flipped it open, reading entries that confirmed her worst fears. Subject transferred to mountain location. Procedure begins tomorrow. LP resisted initially, but cooperation improved after 24 hours. Recording complete. Cleanup successful. No trace evidence remaining. She stumbled back, dropping the journal. These weren't just notes about watching women. These were records of abduction, of torture, possibly murder. A shelf behind the desk held videotapes and external hard drives, each labeled with the same initials from the boxes. She couldn't bring herself to check their contents. She needed to leave to get this information to someone who could help. But as she turned toward the stairs, a floorboard creaked overhead. Someone was in the cabin. She killed her flashlight immediately, plunging the basement into darkness. Footsteps moved across the floor above, slow and deliberate. Then came the sound of the basement door opening. She pressed herself against the wall, hidden behind a set of shelves. The pepper spray felt woefully inadequate against whatever kind of person would be visiting this place. A beam of light swept down the stairs. Then came a voice she recognized. "Hello? Anyone down there?" Detective Harmon. She remained perfectly still, barely breathing, as his footsteps descended the stairs. The flashlight beam moved methodically around the room, coming closer to her hiding spot with each sweep. "I know someone's here," Harmon called out, his voice eerily calm. The gate was unlocked. "You might as well come out." Her mind raced. Could she make it up the stairs before he caught her? Could she fight past him if needed? Or should she face him directly, pretend she had a right to be here? The light stopped moving, and for a moment she thought he'd given up. Then his voice came again, much closer now. "You know, Tom always said you were smarter than you let on." Guess he was right. Her blood turned to ice. Harmon knew she was there. The beam of his flashlight finally found her, pinning her against the wall like a butterfly on display. Well, he said, his voice unnervingly calm. The grieving widow doing some mountain exploring. Finding anything interesting? She gripped the pepper spray in her pocket, calculating the distance between them. "You're not a real detective." "I've been many things over the years." He stepped closer. "Just like your husband. We wore different faces for different situations." His eyes drifted to the journal she dropped. "I see you've been reading our work notes." "You killed those women," she said, her voice shaking. Harmon tilted his head. "Killed? No, that's so crude. We documented, we studied, we preserved experiences." He gestured toward the shelves of boxes. "Each one taught us something valuable." She felt sick but kept talking, trying to edge toward the stairs. "How many?" 12 over 20 years. Tom was very selective." Harmon smiled, a terrible empty smile. "He was also very protective of you. Said you were different, special, wouldn't let me near you." "Is that why you came to the house? Looking for his files on me?" Harmon laughed. "Smart lady. Yes, Tom kept separate records on you. Years of observations before he even approached you. The perfect subject, he called you. Trusting, unquestioning." He glanced around the basement. He was planning to bring you here next month. Had it all scheduled. Then his heart gave out. Cold horror washed over her. Her loving husband had been planning to make her victim number 13. "What happens now?" she asked, stalling for time. Her phone was in her back pocket. If she could just dial 911 without him noticing. "Now," Harmon sighed. "Unfortunately, you've seen too much. But I'm not as careful as Tom was. He planned for months. I prefer to improvise." He lunged suddenly, grabbing for her arm. She was quicker, diving to the side and spraying the pepper spray directly at his face. Harmon howled, clawing at his eyes. She ran for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. Behind her, Harmon recovered quickly, following with heavy footsteps. At the top of the stairs, she slammed the heavy door shut and turned the deadbolt, buying herself precious seconds. Her fingers fumbled with her phone as she ran through the cabin. 3 digits, 9 to 11. 911, what's your emergency? "Men trying to kill me," she gasped, bursting out the front door. Mountain cabin on Ridgeline Road, 3 miles past the fire tower. He's killed before. Please hurry. A crash came from inside the cabin, Harmon breaking through the basement door. She sprinted down the driveway, heading for the trees where she hid in her car. The dispatcher's voice in her ear asked more questions, but she could barely respond. All her focus was on running, escaping. A gunshot cracked through the air. A bullet splintered bark from a tree beside her head. "You can't run from me," Harmon shouted from behind. "Tom picked you because you had nowhere to go, no one who'd miss you." Another shot, closer this time. She zigzagged between trees, the dispatcher now urgently saying police were on their way. But would they arrive in time? Her car came into view, just 30 more yards. Her lungs burned, legs aching from the steep terrain. 20 yards. Another shot. 10 yards. She could hear Harmon crashing through the undergrowth behind her. Her hand reached for the car door when something slammed into her back, knocking her to the ground. Harmon had tackled her, his weight crushing the air from her lungs. The phone skidded away across the dirt. "It didn't have to be this messy," he panted, pinning her down. With desperate strength, she twisted beneath him, her hand finding a rock on the ground. She swung it hard, connecting with his temple. Harmon grunted, his grip loosening just enough. She scrambled away, diving into her car. The key turned. The engine roared to life. Harmon recovered, lunging for the door, but she hit the gas. The car fishtailed on the dirt before finding traction, jerking forward as Harmon clung to the door handle. For a terrible moment, he kept pace, his face a mask of rage at her window. Then his grip slipped, and he tumbled away. She didn't slow down until she reached the main road, where 3 police cars raced past her, lights flashing, heading toward the cabin. She pulled over, shaking uncontrollably, and waited. Later, she sat wrapped in a blanket in the back of an ambulance as officers secured the scene. They'd found Harmon trying to destroy evidence when they arrived. The cabin was now a crime scene, its terrible secrets being documented by people who would make sure justice was served. "We found records of 12 missing women," a kind-faced officer told her. "Because of you, their families will finally have answers." 1 year later, she stood in a courtroom as the judge sentenced Harmon to life without parole. The evidence from the cabin had revealed everything. The abductions, the recordings, the souvenirs kept in those labeled boxes. DNA had confirmed the identities of all 12 victims. She had sold the house, changed her name, moved to a different state. Tom's life insurance had gone to a fund for the victims' families. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she still wondered how she had missed the signs, lived with a monster for years without knowing. But she had survived. She had brought his crimes to light. And now, working as a volunteer for a missing persons organization, she helped others find the truth they were searching for, however painful it might be. The locked room had held terrible secrets, but in uncovering them, she had finally found herself.